Under the scorching sun of the Arizona desert, where even bones turned to dust, a pregnant Mustang Mare was dragged out of a truck and left at the edge of a cliff. No water, no food, no hope. They said, "She's not worth a dime." But they didn't know that the tiny life growing inside her would make the whole country look deep into its conscience. And everything began with a girl named Ellie. Comanche Flats was a strip of parched land where the wind swept relentlessly across brittle hills and the sun seemed to scorch both past and future. Everything here felt old weathered porch roofs, rusted mailbox flags, and hearts worn down by too much disappointment. And in a sagging 3-room wooden house near the dirt road lived a girl named Ellie Rayner. She was 17. All she had was a head of tangled hair and storm-colored eyes, gray-blue, like the sky before a thunderstorm. Her father had died 3 years earlier in a mining accident in New Mexico, leaving behind her mother, Ruth, with a weak heart, and 2 younger siblings, Travis and June. Their house groaned under every windstorm, on the verge of collapsing. Ellie had become the backbone hauling firewood, pumping well water, putting meals on the table, and clinging to the last bits of laughter left in the home. One morning in March, Ellie rose early, wrapped her flannel shirt with the ripped shoulder around her frame, and grabbed a dull axe to head out to the northern ridge for firewood. The path was barren as always, but something felt off that day. There was a sound in the wind, not the usual gusts or hawk calls, but a low, broken moan. She crept past jagged rocks and saw it. A dark bay mare, bloodied, hind legs trembling, struggling in the middle of a cactus thicket, caught in the throes of labor. Ellie didn't know what to do. Her heart pounded so fast it felt like it would burst. She took a breath, dropped the axe, and stepped forward slowly. "Hey," she whispered, voice shaking, "I'm not here to hurt you, okay?" The mare flinched back, eyes wide with terror, then collapsed with a piercing cry. Ellie saw the foal's head emerging, but it was stuck, no further progress. She understood without help, both mother and baby might die here. Despite the fear, Ellie knelt on the hot sand. Her hands were filthy, but her actions were steady. She stroked the mare's neck, speaking in low, warm tones. Inch by inch, she helped ease the foal out. Blood, sand, and sweat mixed into something salty and warm in her palms. At last, the foal slipped free. Ellie gasped for air, soaked in every fiber of her being. The newborn was small, soaked, trembling, but alive. She wiped its muzzle with her shirt and saw a streak of red dust across its forehead, like a strange, sacred mark. "I'll call you Dusty," Ellie whispered, with a trembling smile. She tried to coax the mare later to be named Sabletooth Stand, but the mare wouldn't budge. Her eyes were half closed, breaths ragged. Ellie didn't give up. She tore her flannel shirt into strips, fashioned a makeshift lead, tied it gently around the mare's neck, and pulled. After minutes of coaxing, Sable staggered forward following Dusty, who was now trying to stand for the very first time. The 3 of them reached home just as the sun was setting. Ruth rushed out of the house. "Ellie, what is that? Lord, not another burden!" I couldn't leave her to die, Mama," Ellie said softly. "She needs me, and I think I need her too. You can't even feed yourself. Don't go playing savior of the world." But Ellie didn't answer. She led Sable and Dusty into the old shed behind the house, once used for her father's aging mule, and lit a kerosene lamp to scan the cracked beams. Every rafter groaned, every hook was rusted. But Ellie smiled. "We have a roof now, Dusty." That night she sat beside the foal, eyes blurred with tears, but heart warmed. The wind still howled above the barn, but somehow it didn't feel so cold anymore. Maybe because, for the first time in 3 long years, something had begun to flicker back to life inside her. The next morning, the Texas sun scorched Comanche Flats with its usual weariness. It wasn't a radiant kind of sunlight. It was heavy, oppressive, as if even the sky was tired of itself. Rays of light crawled across warped shingles, slipped through cracks in the old shed, and lit up the thick layer of dust on every beam. Ellie had been up before the horizon. Her hands were grimy, the shoulder of her shirt torn even wider, but her eyes glimmered with a strange kind of resolve. She mixed well water with a little salt and molasses and carried it to the shed for Sable. The mare was still weak but able to stand, her eyes softer than they had been the day before. Dusty lay curled against her belly, legs trembling, but his small ears perked up at every new sound. The back door creaked open behind her. "Ellie," Ruth's voice floated out, thin and hesitant. "Can I talk to you?" Ellie didn't turn. She only nodded slightly. "I know we don't have much," her mother said carefully. "And I was harsh yesterday. I'm just scared, sweetheart. I don't want you getting attached to something that might hurt you again." "I'm not hurting, Mama," Ellie replied, still stroking Dusty's back. "I feel alive." Ruth said nothing. She stared at her daughter's calloused hands, then quietly turned back inside. For the next week, Ellie barely ate or slept. She was entirely devoted to Sable and Dusty. She hauled water from the deep well behind the house, mixed a little cornmeal mash in a tin bucket, carefully cooked, and watched over it, so the foal wouldn't choke on anything too hard. She dug out her father's old books, learned how to dilute cow's milk for a young horse's stomach, and fed Dusty drop by drop with a small rubber tube. At mealtimes, she gave her share of roasted corn or fry bread to her little siblings. As for herself, she sipped salt water and returned to the shed. She didn't feel hungry. There was a fullness inside her that she hadn't known since her father died. One afternoon, while tying the broken barn door shut with rope, Ellie spotted a rusty pickup pulling into the yard. It was Wade Mercer, the old neighbor from the southern ranch. "Howdy there, Ellie," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you've got a special guest?" Ellie raised an eyebrow, but led him to the shed. Wade froze for a moment at the sight of Dusty, then chuckled under his breath. "Well, I'll be... This little one's a Mustang? Good grief, she's got one strange build." "I found her in the desert," Ellie said. "Her mama was abandoned." "Abandoned?" Wade frowned. "Who the hell would dump a mare like that?" Ellie told him everything. Wade stayed silent for a long while, then sighed. "Ellie, your father helped me once, back when I lost my wife. I figure it's time I return the favor. I know someone used to train Mustangs without a whip. Name's Hank Fletcher. Lives out west in the red dirt country. Used to break champions at Fort Worth." "I don't have money," Ellie said, shaking her head. Wade smiled. "With Hank, money's not always what matters most." A few days later, Hank Fletcher arrived, an old man with weathered skin, a wide-brimmed hat, and a voice that moved slow-like. Every word had been soaked in aged whiskey. He didn't speak much. He stepped into the shed, stared at Dusty for a long time, then said only one sentence. "This horse doesn't need to be trained. She needs to be understood." From that day forward, every morning at dawn, while fog still clung to the fences, Ellie and Hank began their sessions. Not riding, not performing, just walking back and forth, touching the shoulder, brushing the knee, teaching Dusty to react to cues. Hank taught Ellie how to stand still, how to breathe in rhythm, because a horse can read your feelings even when you're silent. One time, Dusty yanked the lead rope and bolted. Ellie shouted instinctively. Hank didn't scold her. He simply said, "If you want her to trust you, you've got to learn to trust gentleness." Day by day, Dusty began responding to Ellie's voice, following her like a shadow. One morning, Ellie sat on the grass and Dusty bent her legs, lay down beside her, and rested her head on Ellie's shoulder. "You're not just learning how to live," Ellie whispered. "You're learning how to trust." Word spread like wildfire. Comanche Flats folks began whispering, "That Rayner girl's gone nuts. treating a wild horse like a pet. Someone even threatened to report her for harboring an unregistered Mustang. Ellie grew afraid. When the strangers came near, she hid Dusty in the back stall, locked the door, and kept everything quiet in the dark. One evening, while cleaning the shed, Ellie noticed a paper tossed over the fence. It was a flyer from the Wildlife Control Office. Someone had actually filed a report. "If I lose you," she whispered, clutching Dusty's neck, "I don't know what I'd have left." What she didn't know was that far to the west, in a glassy house filled with wine racks and gold-frame mirrors, a man named Clayton Briggs was reading an article titled, "The Girl and the Mustang Who Survived the Desert." The photo showed Ellie standing beside Dusty, her hand on the foal's forehead, and in her eyes a look Clayton recognized immediately. A look he'd once seen in the face of something he thought he had left to die. Clayton narrowed his eyes. "So you're still alive, little one," he muttered. "Then it's time to take back what's mine." The early summer sun in Comanche Flats was unlike anywhere else. It didn't just burn it, carried the scent of scorched soil and the constant hum of insects echoing from the tall wild brush. Each morning, as the first gold beam sliced across the sagging fence, Ellie stood by the shed, waiting for Hank and his battered canvas bag filled with rope, brushes, and a few stubby carrots. He never brought a whip or anything that might inspire fear. Hank entered like a piece of morning light, gentle, slow, and with nothing to prove. Dusty no longer backed away when she saw him. Instead, she tilted her head, sniffed his hands, and nudged at the bag, as if she already knew her little prize was waiting inside. The training session started simple. A few laps in a circle. Turning her head on cue, tapping a front hoof to encourage a lift, followed by warm, quiet praise. But to Hank, no lesson was ever small. He watched every movement as though reading a book, silently observing each fear, each little hesitation that hadn't yet healed. "Ellie," he said once when she tugged the lead too hard, "a horse doesn't speak your language, but she can feel your heart pounding when you're trying to drag her somewhere she doesn't understand. If you want her to follow first, you have to learn how to stand still." Another day, Dusty spooked when a red cloth fell from the fence. She reared up, kicking the wall in panic. Ellie rushed forward, ready to grab the rope. Hank held up a hand. Don't silence her when she's screaming in fear. Let her learn it's just a piece of cloth, not something with teeth." Ellie stepped back, breathing deeply. Slowly, she picked up the cloth, folded it, and held it out. Dusty flinched, then crept forward, sniffed, and after a few heartbeats, touched it with her nose. "Good," Hank nodded. "Strength isn't always about pulling harder. Sometimes it's knowing when not to pull at all." Each afternoon, Ellie brushed Dusty's coat for hours, talking the whole time quiet stories and whispered memories. She spoke of her father, who had once dreamed of building the finest horse ranch in the region, of her mother, who battled every day against a heart too fragile to carry her burdens, of her siblings who gave up their share of food so she could chase a dream no one else believed in. Dusty, of course, never answered, but the way she looked up, those eyes fixed on Ellie, made her feel like someone, finally, was truly listening. In the third week, a local reporter from Plains and Prairie came knocking. They'd heard about the Mustang girl from Wade and were curious. A photo was taken. Ellie in the pasture, one hand on the lead rope, Dusty beside her, wild yet gentle, a living paradox. The article ran that Monday. Within 3 days it had spread through the nearby counties, and then beyond the borders of Texas. Letters started arriving. A woman in Amarillo mailed a piece of old saddlecloth, writing, "Dusty reminds me of my first horse when I was 12. A boy from Lubbock drew a picture of Dusty in crayon, folded in his school notebook paper. And then a phone call from Colorado, a horse ranch owner offering to buy Dusty for $15,000. enough to rebuild their home, pay for Ruth's medical care, start over. Hank handed Ellie the phone. "This is your decision, but remember, some things can't be measured in dollars." Ellie listened to the man's offer on the other end. "Thank you, sir," she said calmly, "but Dusty doesn't have a price. She's the answer to everything I never knew how to ask." Word spread even faster. Some praised her. Others called her foolish. But Ellie knew. This was the first time in her life she'd chosen to keep something that made her heart feel whole again. Then, on a Thursday morning, while Ellie was teaching Dusty to step sideways in rhythm, Hank suddenly stopped mid-stride. "You hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" He bent down, picking up a scrap of newspaper caught in the fence. It was part of the article about Ellie, her photo with Dusty. A red pen had drawn a line under the caption, "Abandoned foal survives desert birth." Hank sighed. "You might want to brace yourself." "For what?" "When a horse they once threw away starts to shine, people come crawling out to claim it." 3 days later it happened. A glossy SUV pulled into Ellie's driveway. Before the dust even settled, the door opened. Clayton Briggs stepped out, dressed in a gray suit, polished leather shoes, flanked by 2 lawyers in red ties. "Miss Rayner," he said coolly, "I believe you're in possession of something that legally belongs to me." Ellie stood in front of the shed, eyes locked on him. "Dusty isn't property. Under Arizona law, any horse bred within the registry of my ranch is considered legal asset unless proven otherwise. And you, forgive me, have nothing but a cheap tabloid photo." Hank stepped forward and handed Ellie a small recorder. "Play this," he said. "I called Jorge the man Clayton hired to dump Sable, asked if he remembered. Here's what he said. He told me to leave her in the desert, said she was defective stock. I didn't have a choice." Clayton blinked, turned to his lawyers. One of them flinched. The other said nothing. "Not enough," Clayton hissed. "No signature, no video. Nothing admissible in court." "But enough," Hank said, "for this town to know who left a pregnant animal to die." Clayton's eyes narrowed at Ellie. "Don't think this means you've won." He turned and walked back to his car. Before he climbed in, he looked back one last time, and in that look, Ellie understood. She had just awakened a man who didn't know how to lose. That night, the wind kicked up across Comanche Flats. Ellie couldn't sleep. Then she smelled smoke. She bolted upright. The shed where Dusty slept was on fire. Barefoot, she ran. The wind howled, flames roared. Hank and Wade came sprinting from down the road. Ellie screamed and fought the fire with everything she had. They managed to stop it, but most of the roof had collapsed. And Dusty, choking from the smoke, could barely stand. Ellie cradled the foal's head, whispering through tears, "I'm sorry, I couldn't protect you." There was no proof, but everyone knew who had the motive. Hank placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice raspy from smoke. "If this girl still has that fire in her eyes after everything, then this horse, she's going to leap over the whole damn world." 3 days after the fire, the sun still hung over Comanche Flats, but it no longer felt warm. The light had turned harsh, cold, like the kind that reminded people of what they'd lost, more than what they hoped for. The old barn stood charred and broken, only a blackened frame of scorched wood and warped tin left behind. But the most terrifying part wasn't the ruins. It was the silence in Dusty's eyes. Since that night, the young Mustang no longer trusted the way she once did. Whenever someone approached, even Ellie, she would turn away or brace herself as if preparing to flee. Her curious gaze had been replaced with something dull, cautious, guarded. Ellie felt like her heart had been shredded into pieces. "She won't forget," Hank said, hammering nails into a temporary fence. "But that doesn't mean she'll live there forever. Same as us, Ellie. Losing trust is just the first step. What matters is showing her someone's still here." Ellie bit her lip, gathered the broken boards, and began rebuilding the shed with her bare hands. She had no money, but she had shoulders that had carried more than her share since childhood. Hank helped. So did Wade. A few locals brought sheets of metal, a box of nails, even a brand-new flashlight. Ellie was overwhelmed with gratitude, but she only nodded and kept working. Then came a strange letter from Houston. No return address. Only bold, typed words, urgent regarding Dusty's origin. Inside was an old, blurry photograph of a rearing mare in the Red Rock Desert, almost identical to Dusty, but with a grayer coat. Alongside it, a copy of a 2018 registry form. Mare, Mustang Pureblood. Temporary name, Sable. Owner, Clayton Briggs. Rancho del Cielo. On the margin, a note scrawled and shaky, as if written by someone frightened. Clayton hid this mare. She wasn't defective. She was pregnant after being bred with a rare stallion from the High Rock Basin herd. The foal could be more valuable than anything he's ever sold, but he didn't want to share it, so he ordered her disposed of. Ellie handed the letter to Hank. He read it and sat in silence for a long while. "You know anything about High Rock Basin?" he asked. "No. It used to be a protected wild zone, shut down after poachers wiped out most of the herd. If Dusty really carries that bloodline, she's not just talented. She's a symbol of survival. And if that gets out, Clayton will bury it. He can't let the world know he abandoned a living legacy." 2 days later, a horse trailer rolled up to their gate. A woman in her 50s stepped out, sun-faded plaid shirt, streaked silver blonde hair, dark sunglasses. "My name's Janice Rowley," she said. "Used to work at Rancho del Cielo, took care of their purebreds." She pulled out the same photograph from the letter. "I'm the one who snuck into the Red Dunes that day and took this. I didn't think anyone would ever read the truth." Janice explained that Sable Dusty's mother was never sick or dangerous, like Clayton had claimed. She'd been the most prized mare in the ranch, bred with a stallion named Warcry, a legendary Mustang once chased by pro riders from Nevada to Oregon. He knew that if the foal survived, he'd have to share ownership. Wildlife law makes that clear. So he did the easiest thing. He erased the bloodline. Ellie stood still. She looked where Dusty curled in the shade, still wheezing faintly from smoke. "I want this out there," Ellie said. "I want the world to know Dusty isn't some worthless rescue. She's the witness to a crime." "I'll testify," Janice nodded, "but be ready. Clayton's got money, lawyers. He can buy silence." That night, Hank brought Ellie a wooden box. Inside were stacks of cassette tapes, old recordings he'd saved from his years in the Horse Breeders' Guild. He once silenced a worker who broke his leg because a horse wasn't vaccinated. Another died from an infection after cleaning stalls without gear. I kept the tapes not for revenge, but for a day when someone finally wanted the truth. Ellie held the recorder, her hands shaking. She had never felt so close to a fight not for fame, not for glory, but for a horse that couldn't speak for itself. The next morning, Dusty began to eat again. She no longer hid in the shadows. Every morning, Ellie whispered to her, "We're not finished. I'll protect you, and everything you stand for." A short video went live on social media from the account Ellie Rayner, Truth for Dusty. In it, she told the story. Dusty's origin, High Rock Basin, Sable. Janice's photo. The video lasted only 3 minutes. But in 24 hours, it was shared tens of thousands of times. News outlets began to notice. A local station called. An animal rights group from Utah offered legal help. And then Ellie's screen lit up with a new message, a familiar name. Clayton Briggs has hired someone to find Dusty. Be careful. Jorge. Ellie stared out the window. Dusty stood in the pasture, stepping softly beneath the sun like a spirit reborn from ash. Hank joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The door's open now, but behind it lies a world that doesn't want you to walk through." Ellie didn't turn. She only said quietly, "Then let's see who makes it to the other side." That morning, the air over Comanche Flats was thick, like the scent of ash still clung to the bark of every tree. Ellie had woken early. She hadn't really slept. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who set the fire? What would Clayton do next? And was all this noise, these videos, letters, memories, really enough to stir a world so used to staying silent? She checked the old tape recorder Hank had given her. Each cassette was labeled with a date, as if he'd quietly been preparing for this day all along. Ellie picked one marked June 2018, Del Cielo Ranch, details on Sable. She pressed play. A hiss of static, then a familiar voice, low, cold, calculated. "Just get rid of it. I don't care how. I won't let a foal carrying Warcry's blood ruin the value of my pure lines. There'll be no sharing. If you have to, toss her off a canyon. No one will find her." Ellie dropped the recorder. Her hands trembled. There was no more doubt. It was Clayton's voice, and it was undeniable. That afternoon, she, Hank, and Janice drove to McCullen to meet with a local attorney, Corey Alden, known for his work in animal abuse and genetic fraud cases. "If this tape's legit," Corey said, leaning back in his chair, "you're holding a bomb, but bombs burn." "We know," Ellie said, "but we're done staying quiet." Corey nodded. He laid out the steps, verifying the tape's authenticity, confirming Dusty's bloodline, and proving Clayton had willfully covered up the existence of a rare heritage Mustang. Meanwhile, Jorge's messages kept coming. One in particular chilled Ellie. "They're watching Dusty, night drones, GPS on the fence line." Immediately, Hank and Janice checked every inch of the rebuilt shed. In the far corner, beneath a warped plank, they found a small device, barely bigger than a thumb. A tracker. Janice crushed it beneath her heel. "Not the first time I've seen one of those," she muttered. That night, Ellie filmed another video. This time, she didn't hold back. She said Clayton's name. She spoke of Sable and Warcry. She played a clip of the recording. She told the stories of the people who'd suffered. The man who broke his leg, the one who died from infection, the mare left in the desert with her unborn foal. The video spread like wildfire. Major media picked it up. KTXN out of Texas, Desert News in Arizona, even a freelance reporter from the National Mustang Registry. The first headline read, "The Abandoned Horse and the Girl Who Took on a Breeding Empire." The lead photo showed Ellie brushing Dusty's mane before the burned-out shed ashes in the background, determination in her eyes. Clayton responded fast. A takedown notice arrived within days. Then a formal legal warning accusing Ellie of defamation, trespassing, and disrupting a nationally relevant genetic supply chain. "What a jackass," Corey muttered, scanning the letter. "He thinks he's the god of horse breeding?" "He thinks everyone's still afraid," Janice answered, but the world wasn't quiet anymore. As Dusty slowly recovered, so did something else her trust. The burns on her leg had scabbed over, her coat was starting to shine again. But most of all, she began meeting Ellie's gaze. No more flinching, no more fear. One night, beneath a moon thin as a silver blade, Dusty walked toward Ellie, placed her muzzle softly in Ellie's open palm. Ellie broke down, sobbing like a child. It was the first time Dusty had ever made the first move. "She's chosen to trust you," Hank said. "Now you have to prove she was right." 3 days later, Corey received a summons from the federal court in Austin. A preliminary hearing was scheduled to assess the legal standing of Ellie's evidence and decide who had temporary custody of Dusty. Everyone got to work. Ellie practiced her testimony. Corey built the legal packet. Janice organized documents from years past. And Hank quietly called a few old friends, people who'd seen what cruelty looked like in the breeding world. "If this is about justice," he said, "then Ellie's not walking in there alone." But before the court date, something unexpected happened. Jorge showed up. He stood at the gate, exhausted, dirt-streaked, one arm bandaged in gauze. "I've been followed," he said, "but I found this." He handed Ellie a flash drive. On it, a security camera clip. The footage showed a tall man in a brimmed hat sneaking into the yard and setting fire to the shed. As he turned, the wind lifted his hat just long enough to reveal his face. Travis Kern, longtime head of security at Rancho del Cielo. "He used to get bonuses for protecting genetic assets," Ellie whispered, "and now he burns down barns." "Worse," Jorge added, "Clayton paid him to destroy evidence. But the old storage system at the ranch kept backup footage. I made a copy." That night, they all sat at Ellie's kitchen table. No one ate. No one spoke much. The only light came from the screen as the evidence played tapes, photos, audio, Jorge's video. Ellie clenched her fists. "Tomorrow, we're not just protecting a horse. We're protecting the truth." Janice nodded. Hank put a hand on her shoulder. Jorge gave a faint smile for the first time since he arrived. "And if we have to," he said, "we'll show the world what a thrown-away horse really stands for." Rain fell that morning in sheets, clouds rolling over Austin like a warning drumbeat. Ellie sat in the back seat of Hank's pickup truck, forehead leaning against the cool glass, listening to the tires splash against wet asphalt. Each raindrop felt like a heartbeat, each breath a chime in her chest. Beside her, Dusty stood quietly in the enclosed trailer, calm, almost curious, as if somehow she understood today the truth would finally be called by name. "You nervous?" Hank asked, eyes on the road. "Not nervous," Ellie answered. "Just feels like my stomach's tied in knots. Kind of like the first time I rode at Sienna Camp. But this time, the prize isn't a ribbon." "No," Hank said, nodding. "It's freedom. For both of you." The federal courthouse in Austin wasn't built for girls who grew up in horse stalls. But Ellie, wearing a simple white shirt, hair tied back, and those storm-gray eyes steady as ever, walked through its doors like she'd been born to speak for the voiceless. The hearing began at 9:15 a.m. The courtroom was packed. People stood in the aisles. Local media were there. Quiet cameras perched in back corners. Animal rights advocates had come from as far as Arizona, holding hand-painted signs outside. "Every horse has a voice. Dusty is the evidence." On the plaintiff's side stood Corey Alden Crisp, razor sharp, carrying a case file that looked more like a novel. On the defense, Clayton Briggs, expression frozen, flanked by 3 lawyers in matching red ties. Presiding over it all, Judge Marlene Carson, a black woman with silver-framed glasses and a reputation for dismantling men who thought power granted them moral immunity. First up, Ellie. She stepped to the stand, clutching the recorder in one hand, her eyes fixed on the judge. "I'm not a lawyer," she began. "I'm just a girl who loves horses. I was raised in Texas dirt, and I learned right from wrong, not in books, but in the eyes of an animal who'd been hurt." She told the story of the desert, of Dusty's first breath, of the scars on her back, the fire, the voice on the tape. Corey played the recording, Clayton's voice, unmistakable, cold, calculated. Then came Jorge's video. Travis Kern, setting the blaze. The defense objected, claiming it lacked a date stamp. But Corey countered. The footage included timestamp metadata from the original ranch storage system, matching the exact night of the fire. Next, Janice. She spoke of Sable, the breeding logs, the falsified reports. Then Hank recounting the night he pulled Dusty from the smoke and the years of corruption he'd quietly recorded. Finally, Jorge, still bandaged, eyes tired, voice firm. "I worked for him," Jorge said, pointing to Clayton. "But today I speak truth, because if I stay silent now, I'm no better than the man who threw life away for profit." Clayton's attorneys fired back. They presented breeding documents from 2016, claiming Dusty had no legal status, no DNA file, no ownership record. But Corey raised his voice, clear and loud, because he never registered her. Because she was never meant to exist. Because she is living proof of what he tried to erase. Then something no one expected. From the back row, an elderly woman stood, hair snow white, shirt seafoam green. She walked slowly to the front. "My name is Martha Yellen," she said. "I was a vet tech at Rancho del Cielo for 3 years. I was fired for asking too many questions about forced abortions and about a wild mare named Sable." She placed a file on the stand. "I never turned this in. I didn't think anyone would listen. But today, I hope someone will." Inside the file, a genetic match, Dusty's blood, tested by an independent vet, was a perfect match to Sable's archived DNA. Silence filled the room. Judge Carson turned to Clayton. "Mr. Briggs," she said evenly, "do you have anything to say?" Clayton didn't answer. He leaned toward his attorneys, whispered something, then leaned back, jaw clenched. The judge recessed for 15 minutes. When she returned, her voice was sharp and final. "This court finds cause to investigate Mr. Clayton Briggs for arson, genetic fraud, and animal cruelty. Furthermore, custody of the mare known as Dusty is hereby granted to Miss Ellie Rayner under temporary legal guardianship pending final ownership registration." There was no explosion, just a quiet release, then a wave of emotion. Janice hugged Ellie. Hank clapped Corey's shoulder. And outside, in the covered trailer, Dusty let out a long, high whinny like she'd known all along what this day meant. That afternoon, with rain falling like mist, Ellie led Dusty through a grove of wet pines. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them, walking side by side through the quiet. "You fought so hard," she whispered. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." Dusty lowered her head and pressed her cheek to Ellie's shoulder. No longer a wild horse, but a partner just as destiny had rewritten it. Spring in the western Sierra foothills didn't arrive with thunder or rain. It came with the sound of horses calling across green fields and wind sweeping down the mountains, carrying the scent of wildflowers, wet soil, and pine needles. And right there on 20 acres of land, bought by a young woman named Ellie Rayner, with donations and the Freedom for Wildlife award money, a new wooden barn stood in quiet dignity. No signs, no plaques, just horses, grass, and souls learning how to heal. Dusty walked gracefully beside Ellie now. She had grown tall, her coat sleek and muscle strong. There was no trace of the foal once dragged out of a dying mare. And Ellie, after the courtroom victory, had turned down interviews, talk shows, and book offers. She had stepped away from flashing lights and returned to a place where there were no judgments, only wind. "You planning to open some kind of rehab center?" That was Levi 14, the first kid Ellie took in to help with the horses. He asked the question while brushing a shaggy little rescue pony from a seized training camp. "Not exactly a rehab," Ellie smiled. "I just want a place where no one asks a horse if it's worth anything, and no person has to prove they were good enough to be loved." The place had a name, Sable's Hollow, a quiet cradle where imperfect things were welcomed as they were. No ropes, no whips, just time, trust, and silence enough for broken hearts to be heard again. In April, an unexpected visitor arrived. A man in a sun-faded cowboy hat stepped out of an old GMC truck, holding a small wooden box. His beard was silver along the edges. His hands trembled slightly as he approached. "I'm looking for Ellie Wren." "That's me." Ellie stepped into the light, the afternoon sun catching in her hair like a streak of gold. "I'm Willard Briggs, Clayton's brother." Silence. Levi stopped brushing the pony mid-stroke. Ellie didn't flinch, just tilted her head and nodded him toward the porch. Willard opened the box. Inside was a silver saddle tag, etched with the name Sable 2011. Scratched, dried blood along the edge, but still intact. Clayton didn't leave much, Willard said. Just this, and a few scribbled notes. He died in jail 2 weeks ago. Stroke. No one claimed the body. I was the last one left. He handed her a crumpled sheet. The writing was crooked, faint. I didn't believe animals had souls. I was wrong. That horse. She looked at me in a way no person ever had. In her eyes, I saw what I lost when I was a boy. If Ellie still remembers Sable, tell her bring Dusty somewhere he belongs. Ellie folded the paper in silence. I'm not asking you to forgive my brother, Willard said, but if you'd let me, I'd like to work here. I grew up around horses, gave it up, but now I'd like to end with something decent. Ellie looked at him, then at Dusty, standing at a distance, watching with those steady eyes. After a long moment, she nodded. There's no such thing as too late here, she said. As long as you know how to love from the beginning or from the middle, that's enough. That summer, Sable's Hollow welcomed 4 new rescues, 3 from a busted illegal training camp, and 1 newborn foal found abandoned near the salt flats. Dusty became their big sister. She led the way through open pasture, showing them how to stand firm when the wind roared. One afternoon, Ellie stood beneath the largest red pine on the hill, camera in hand, photographing Dusty playing with a young colt. Just then, Levi came running up with a letter. From the Texas State Board. It's got an official seal. Ellie opened it. Inside, recognition of Sable's Hollow as a nonprofit sanctuary under state protection, along with 3 years of operating funds and a letter of thanks for changing the public's understanding of wild animal worth. Ellie laughed out loud, the first real laugh in months. Did you hear that, Dusty? She shouted. They made you an official educator. Dusty neighed in response, then galloped in a wide arc across the pasture as if dancing just for her. That night, Ellie wrote in her journal, once someone left a pregnant mare to die in the desert. They thought that was the end, but no one knew. A seed born in suffering, if watered with trust, can bloom into something the whole world has to stop and witness. As night fell over the Sierra foothills, Ellie walked to the wooden fence and stood beside Dusty. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand in Dusty's mane, then leaned her forehead against hers, just like that very first day. And from the mountaintop, the wind came sweeping down, carrying the voices of things long lost, and the hope of everything just beginning. If you believe that even the abandoned deserve a chance to shine, leave a 1 below. And if you think Ellie did what we all should do at least once in life, leave a 0. Don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories for more moving, powerful tales like this. Because who knows, the next miracle might begin with a single glance you almost missed.